My wife thought she'd get half my business in the divorce, until I revealed I never put her name on it. Now she's threatening legal action and claiming I tricked her, but I only protected myself. I'm 45, male, and I've been married to my wife, let's call her Sarah, for 18 years. We have 2 kids, both teens now, and we've had a pretty good life together, at least that's what I thought. Our marriage was far from perfect, but whose isn't, right? There were ups and downs, but I never expected that things would end like this. So, a little background first. I run a small tech consulting business. When I started it, I was barely getting by, working nights, weekends, pulling in whatever I could to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but I knew what I wanted to build. It wasn't until 5 years in that it actually started making a decent profit, and by the time it was making real money, Sarah and I were already well into our marriage. To be clear, though, Sarah never really had anything to do with the business. She had her own job, a solid career, but she wasn't involved with my work at all. I worked long hours. Hell, some days I barely saw her or the kids. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it was all smooth sailing. Marriage is hard. And work-life balance? Forget about it. But I always thought we were okay. We had our issues, but we were a team. Or at least I thought we were. The cracks started showing about a year ago. Small things, really. She'd be more distant, less interested in what I was doing, and when I tried to talk about my business, it felt like she wasn't really listening. That's when I started to feel it, the shift. But the real kicker came out of nowhere. About 6 months ago, Sarah came to me and said she wanted a divorce. I wasn't entirely shocked, honestly. I mean, something had been off for a while, and we hadn't been on the best terms for the last year. But it still hurt. I thought I was doing everything right, keeping things together as best as I could. I didn't think it was going to end like this, but there we were. We decided to separate for a while, to give each other some space. I thought maybe it would give us both clarity, but in hindsight, I should have seen the warning signs. After about a month, Sarah started talking more about the logistics of the divorce. You know, the practical stuff, the house, the kids, the money. That's when it first came up. She said, and I quote, "I'm entitled to half of everything. That includes the business, you know." I was caught off guard. I didn't even know how to respond at first. I asked her, "What are you talking about? The business isn't something you've ever been a part of." But she was adamant. She kept saying that since we'd been married for so long, and since I had built the business while we were together, she deserved a share of it. At that point, I didn't know if she was serious or just angry, but I tried to be calm. I tried to explain that the business was mine before we even got married, that I didn't need her help to build it, and that it was something I created on my own. That didn't go over well. Sarah's response was pretty much what I expected. "Well, you may have started it, but I've been here for 18 years. I've supported you through everything. So don't you dare act like you built this thing alone." She sounded so convinced, so entitled. And it was the first time in a long while that I felt the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a normal argument anymore. This wasn't about who forgot to take out the trash or who missed an anniversary. This was about money. It was about something I worked my whole life for. And it was starting to feel like she was willing to take it all without even considering what I had put into it. I remember sitting there in silence for a while, just trying to digest what she said. It wasn't like I hadn't considered that one day our marriage might end, but I never thought it would be like this. I thought we'd figure things out without her feeling like she was entitled to half of my business. I knew I had to do something. I needed to protect myself. I spent the next few weeks in a blur, meeting with my lawyer, getting my ducks in a row. What I learned was something I had honestly never thought about before. The business was fully in my name, and it always had been. I didn't put her on any of the legal paperwork. No shares, no ownership. It was all mine. I won't lie. It felt a little sneaky, but at the same time, it was necessary. I wasn't about to let her take what I'd built just because we'd been married. She had no claim to it. None. I thought about this for a long time, about whether it was fair or not, and ultimately, I came to the conclusion that I had done nothing wrong. She didn't want anything to do with my business while we were together, and now that we were separating, she was suddenly entitled to it? No way. I can't say I was thrilled to reveal this to her, but I knew I had to. So, when we sat down to talk about the divorce settlement, I told her straight up, I made sure the business is set up just for me. It's not part of the divorce. She was silent for a few seconds. Then, her eyes narrowed. What do you mean, it's not part of the divorce? I'm entitled to it. No, I said. You're not. I didn't put your name on it. The business is mine. I've worked for this long before we got married, and I made sure you're not part of it legally. That was my choice, and I stand by it. I thought she might explode, but she didn't. At first, anyway. She just sat there, staring at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The silence was deafening. Finally, after what felt like forever, she said, "You're telling me that after all these years, I've done everything for you and the kids, and you deliberately left me out of the business?" Her voice was shaking with anger. "You've been hiding this from me, haven't you? You've never trusted me, and now you're going to make me fight for what's rightfully mine." I tried to stay calm, but this was the part that shook me. I didn't hide anything. I just made sure that I protected myself. I wasn't going to let you try to take something I built after we've been drifting apart for so long. That's when she lost it. The anger turned to desperation. "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed. "If you don't change this, I will make sure you regret it. I'll take you to court, and I'll make sure you pay for every penny of this. Don't think you've won, because you haven't." The next few days were uncomfortable, to say the least. Sarah wasn't just upset. She was determined. I could feel it every time she walked into the room. There was this coldness to her that I hadn't felt before. She would give me these looks that felt like daggers, like she was trying to figure out how to make me pay for what I'd done. The worst part? It wasn't just her. The whole thing had started to leak out to the rest of the family. First, it was her sister. I'd always gotten along with her sister, but I knew when Sarah called her, it wasn't for a friendly chat. Sarah's family had always been a little dramatic, and when things went south with her, they all had a tendency to take her side, no matter what. It didn't take long for Sarah's sister to call me. She was furious. "How could you do this to her?" she asked, her voice tight with anger. "You've been married for almost 2 decades, and now you're just going to screw her out of everything? What kind of man are you?" I stayed calm. I had to. I'm not screwing her out of anything. She has the house, the kids, everything. But the business is mine, and I'm not going to let her take it just because she's upset. I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "You really think that's fair? She sacrificed so much for you and the kids. All those late nights and weekends you were working, she was there, holding everything together. And now you're going to take it all for yourself." I almost laughed, but I kept it in. She didn't sacrifice anything for me. We made our choices. I worked late nights because I chose to build something for our future. She didn't even want to know what I was doing half the time. She was barely involved. Her sister didn't say much after that. She just hung up, but I knew this was just the beginning. Word was going to spread. And then came the phone calls. Sarah's lawyer called me the next day, and I could tell she was getting more aggressive. They wanted a meeting now. I'm not a fool. So I already knew what that meant. They were going to try to pressure me into some kind of settlement. It was the tactic they always used when someone was starting to show a little backbone in a divorce. The meeting was intense. Sarah was there, her lawyer was there, and my lawyer was there. I'll admit, I was nervous. It wasn't so much about the legal battle. It was more the personal aspect of it. This was my life we were talking about. But I knew I had to stand my ground. Sarah started off by accusing me of being manipulative. "You've been hiding money, hiding assets, and now you're hiding the business from me too. You can't just take everything and leave me with nothing. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me." I tried to keep my tone neutral, but I could feel the anger rising. "I haven't hidden anything. I told you from the start that the business was mine, and I've always been upfront about that. If you're upset, it's because you don't like the reality of the situation. But that's the way it is." Her lawyer jumped in at that point, trying to make it sound like I had done something shady. "Your client has been avoiding any attempts to share records or give us a clear picture of his assets. How can we be sure that this business isn't a hidden marital asset?" I'd been expecting this. My lawyer stepped in, confident. "All the legal documents are clear. The business was set up long before they were married, and there is no legal claim to it from Sarah. This isn't a case of hiding assets. It's about what was already in place when they got married. We can provide the necessary documentation." But Sarah wasn't backing down. She kept pushing, accusing me of being deceitful. I could tell this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about her pride. She wanted to feel like she was entitled to something, that all the years she'd spent being the supportive wife meant something. And I get that, I do. But the way she was going about it, it wasn't fair. The meeting didn't end with anything new. We all agreed to go back to our respective lawyers and figure it out from there. But I could see the storm brewing. Sarah wasn't going to let this go quietly. And I wasn't about to let her take something that wasn't hers, no matter how much she felt entitled to it. That night, things got even worse. I was at home, trying to unwind, when my son, Lucas, came in. He's 16, so he's been picking up on a lot of the tension, even if we haven't been openly discussing the divorce. He sat down next to me and asked, "Dad, what's really going on with the business? Mom keeps talking about it like you're hiding something." I could see the confusion in his eyes. It hurt to have to explain this to him. I thought he'd be shielded from all of this, but it was clear he was starting to feel the pressure. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. The business is something I started long before I married your mom. It's always been mine, and I've made sure to keep it separate from our finances. I'm not hiding anything, but your mom thinks she should get part of it because we're getting divorced. But she doesn't have any legal claim to it. That's the truth. Lucas looked at me for a long time, his brow furrowed. So, she's just upset because she thinks she deserves something that isn't hers. Yeah, pretty much, I said. And I get that she's hurt, but I can't just give it to her. It's mine. He nodded slowly, then said something that stuck with me. I don't know if this is going to end well, Dad. Things are already messy. I just don't want you to lose everything. Hearing that from my son, it hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. I spent the next few days just trying to hold it together. I was doing everything I could to keep my head straight and prepare for whatever was coming next. But the longer this dragged on, the more I felt like the walls were closing in. Sarah wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting for the image she had in her head of what our marriage should have been. And no matter how much I explained things, I couldn't make her see things my way. And then, Sarah showed up at my office. She was standing there in front of my building when I arrived one morning. I didn't expect to see her. She didn't even text me to say she was coming. Just showed up. When I saw her, my stomach dropped. I hadn't talked to her in days, and I wasn't ready for whatever confrontation this was about to turn into. She looked different, like she'd been stewing over things for days, and when she saw me, she didn't hesitate. "You've made a huge mistake," she said, her voice low but shaking. "I'm going to make sure you regret this. Don't think I'm done. You'll see. I'm taking this all the way." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, unsure of what would come next. I knew Sarah wasn't going to let this go easily, but I wasn't prepared for just how far she'd go. The months that followed her visit to my office were a blur of legal documents, court dates, and constant stress. It was like the divorce had shifted from a personal matter to a full-blown war. Sarah became more and more aggressive. She pushed for everything. She wasn't just fighting for the house and some alimony. She wanted the business. She claimed that, after all these years of marriage, she had an equal right to it. Every time I thought we were getting close to some kind of resolution, she'd raise the stakes again. Her lawyer was equally relentless, throwing accusations of hidden assets, money laundering, and financial mismanagement. And I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I had to protect my kids from the fallout of all this. Lucas, especially, had been picking up on the tension, and it was affecting him. I could tell he was torn between supporting me and wanting peace between his mother and me. It was breaking my heart to see him struggle like that. It wasn't just Sarah who was out for blood. Her family started getting involved too. Her sister, her parents, even distant cousins. All of them started coming after me, either directly or through Sarah. I could feel the judgment every time I stepped into a family gathering, and the passive-aggressive comments started to pile up. I'd always tried to be the good son-in-law, but now they were looking at me like I was the villain. It didn't help that Sarah's family was the type to stick together through thick and thin, even when they were in the wrong. It was one of the things I'd always respected about them, but now it felt suffocating. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. My lawyer called me in for an urgent meeting. Apparently, Sarah's team had found something in my financial records. A document. An old one. One I hadn't even remembered. It was a report from years ago, Well, I had taken a small loan from the business to cover some personal expenses. The loan was repaid in full, with interest, but it wasn't clearly documented in the way it should have been. It was a mistake, a minor one, but one that could be easily misinterpreted. Sarah's lawyer was going to use it as evidence of financial misconduct, claiming that I had been diverting funds for personal use without proper disclosure. I was horrified. The document was legitimate, but it looked bad. If this went to court, it could look like I had been hiding something significant, something that could ruin my credibility and my business's reputation. I had to act fast. I called my lawyer, and we immediately started gathering evidence to show that the loan was legitimate. We had proof that it was repaid and that it didn't impact the business in any way, but it didn't matter. It was messy, and anything messy in a divorce case could be twisted into something it wasn't. Sarah's lawyer wasn't done yet. They sent over a new set of demands, more aggressive than ever. They were now asking for half of the business and a significant portion of my future earnings. It felt like they were using this one mistake as leverage to force me into a settlement I couldn't accept. And then, just as things seemed like they were spiraling out of control, I made a decision. I wasn't going to roll over and give up my business. I had worked too hard for it, but I also wasn't going to keep fighting in the dark. I decided to counterattack, and this time, I wasn't going to hold back. I called a meeting with Sarah, just the two of us. It had been months since we had spoken face-to-face without the lawyers in the room. I knew it was risky, but at this point, I was willing to try anything to get her to see reason. We met at a small cafe, somewhere neutral. It was the first time in a while that I saw her without the cold, calculating look she'd been wearing for months. But the tension between us was still palpable. I know this is hard. I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I know you're angry. But you need to understand, I'm not trying to take everything from you. I've never wanted to destroy you. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. Then why are you fighting me on everything? Why are you hiding things from me? The business, the money, the way you've been shutting me out. It's like you've been planning this for years. I haven't been planning anything, I said, my voice shaking a little. The business is mine. I started it before we even got married, and I've kept it separate. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't just give you half because you feel entitled to it. You had every opportunity to be involved in the business, and you chose not to. I never hid anything from you. I've always been upfront about it. But you've been pushing me into a corner, and I can't just roll over and let you take it. There was silence between us for a long time. I could see her trying to process what I said, but the anger in her eyes didn't fade. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine, she said quietly. I could tell she wasn't going to back down, and I realized at that moment that this wasn't about fairness anymore. This was about pride. She was hurt, and in her mind, I had betrayed her. But I had no choice but to stand my ground. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, tense phone calls, and more threats from Sarah. But finally, we reached a settlement. It wasn't what I had wanted, but it was the best I could get. I ended up paying her a significant sum, much more than I had anticipated, but it was still far less than half of the business. The business stayed mine. I had to make some concessions, but I had protected it from the worst of the damage. It wasn't a victory, but it was the closest I could get to one under the circumstances. Sarah wasn't happy. In fact, she was furious, but she reluctantly accepted the terms. She had her settlement, and I had my business. I wish I could say that everything went back to normal after that, but it didn't. The damage was done, and the divorce had left a permanent mark on everything. It affected how I saw Sarah, how I saw myself, and how I related to my family. The tension was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Eventually, Sarah moved on. She started dating again, and while it was hard to watch at first, I learned to live with it. We never became friends after the divorce, but we managed to co-parent without too much drama. For the sake of the kids, we kept things civil. As for me, I threw myself into my business. I had to rebuild in some ways, but it was still mine. I'm proud of what I've built, and I'm not going to let anyone take that from me. But the truth is, divorce is never easy. Even when you fight to protect what's yours, it changes you. It's messy, It's painful, and it leaves scars that never fully heal. I've learned a lot from the whole experience, and while I'm glad I stood my ground, I'd never wish it on anyone. I just hope my kids understand one day. So, after everything that's happened, I'm starting to question if I did the right thing. I know I protected my business, but I feel like I might have hurt Sarah more than I intended. I've been called selfish by some people, and I get it. Divorce is a messy thing and emotions run high. But at the same time, I feel like I had to do what I did to protect my future. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for fighting to keep my business? Was I too harsh with Sarah? Or did I do what anyone would have done in my position? I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts. Thanks in advance. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts on this story.